Ceremony. Today we'll be discussing the work, the oeuvre of a brilliant artist, Sohrab Sepehri. We'll be taking a look at some of the artistic influences which help drive his work. We'll take a look at some literary works which help to contextualize the impact of his work and the scope of his work. And we'll also be checking out in detail more of this canon. Now, I will be quite upfront. From the get go, there isn't a vast trove of work or documentation about his work in the Western context, but what we do have helps to point towards some telltale signs, the influences of Zen, right? This feeling of the modernity in the culture, and so many things that we've seen in other artists and their influences that we've discussed. We've seen it here with Sohrab's Sepehri's work as well. And as always, we'll be doing it while having some tea. This is where the tea ceremony comes in. And so I invite you to grab your favorite beverage, whatever it is, and take a moment to sip on it while we discuss some tea, while we discuss some artwork and have some tea. So we're having some oolong tea here. High Mountain Oolong, absolutely exquisite, produces this very wonderful flavor. And let me just take a moment to allow the leaves to open up so we can get started with our art tea ceremony. Now, we start off with a poem that helps to encapsulate or give us ground to help support our exploration of Sohrab's work. And we start with Kierkegaard. We start with Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard writes, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." That's what Kierkegaard said. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. Isn't that very interesting? Isn't that a lot like life? That we make sense of things by looking at it through the lens of what we went through the lens of our history. That's how we help to gain a greater sense of understanding, a greater sense of clarity, only through what took place. It's almost as if when we look forward, when we're looking ahead, what we see is a sea of haze, a sea of fog. But when we look back, we say, now it all makes sense. I want you to keep that in mind as we explore Sohrab's work. That looking forward, perhaps it was a little murky. Perhaps it was a little hazy. But looking back, it all makes sense. And so this work that we're looking at right now, this is a work that is untitled by Sohrab. And I want you to just take a moment to take it in, to see what you notice. There seems to be a figure in the middle. She's dressed in white. She has long hair. There appears to be what looks like a sunset in the distance. Perhaps there is a water feature here where that lighter tonality is taking place. Perhaps there are reeds or trees nearby the figure. Perhaps there's someone in a boat in the distance or someone ahead on the hill. There can be so much that it looks like what we're looking towards is almost cut off. We can't see the top of that figure right there blocking the sun. It almost as if, is she heading towards another person? Are they moving closer together? The top is cut off. And just like Kierkegaard's poem, just like Kierkegaard states, looking forward, things don't quite make sense. But if we had the alternate perspective, if we were the figure at the top of the hill looking back, perhaps it would all make sense. Is the figure calling the woman dressed in white towards the sunset? Is she being called towards the horizon? Is she being called towards a sense of destiny? Is she being called towards her dreams? Or is she simply pushed back? Is she simply an observation of what is taking place? And isn't that a lot like our lives? A lot like we find ourselves. Sometimes we don't know if we are moving in a specific direction or if we are simply observing what is taking place. And have you ever found yourself in that sort of state, in that sort of place, where you are looking at your life, but at the same time you are deciding how you should move forward, if you should move in a specific direction? And that's a lot about what this painting evokes for me. So I want you to take a moment to see if you can notice some of the colors that you see used within this painting. What do you notice? What can you see? There seems to be this bright circular orange dominating the top. It is a focal point of it. My eye is drawn to it. Where is your eye drawn? Is it drawn to that same point, towards that yellow spherical shape near the top? Is it drawn towards a figure dressed in white, long hair? Is it drawn next to the seemingly dripping trees? Or perhaps what could be a tree? Is it drawn to the vast expanse of openness within the canvas? What colors do you see? What figures do you notice? What is the placement? What is the mood that is evoked through this painting? It seems kind of like it's meditative. It seems sort of like it is contemplative in terms of the tonal color palette, in terms of the vast openness and part of the reduced figures. What do you notice? What do you see? That is the question. And really, it's worth further exploration. And so, as we prepare for our first pour, we also prepare to explore the life of Sohrab Sepehri and his work, his oeuvre. And so, as we prepare to explore his work, we prepare for our first toast. We dedicate this first toast towards the dreams that are still within you, whether hazy or clear, whether murky or understood. May you find the strength to bring them into the world. Namaste. Exquisite. Exquisite. So, we start our exploration of the work of Sohrab Sepehri. So, this is a painting by Sohrab Sepehri. He was born in 1928. He died in 1980. The painting is untitled. The date, we do not know. However, we can probably date it. We can probably date it to the 20th century. Right? We can probably date it to the 20th century. Relatively easy. And it was brought up to auction at Bonhams, and the price range was 120,000 US dollars to $140,000 US, and it was purchased in 2009, October 12, 2009, and it is residing at the Dubai Royal Mirage Hotel. And so that is this painting. And one thing that really is striking about this painting, one thing that is really evocative, is the elongation. Do you notice this quality of this? Even though the painting is structured in a horizontal framing, there is an elongation of the figures, right? This central figure who's dressed in white with the long hair, who we can see the face, kind of. It's slightly, the hair is slightly blocking it, right? But we can see just the side of the face. And as it is glancing out, and what we notice is that there's a reduction in figures. And what we know, one thing about Sohrab is that he was also a poet. And so this almost feels very literary in a sense, that there's a story being told. It almost feels like there is a narrative, that she is heading in a direction. We can tell there's sense of movement here, right? There's this elongation, there's this sense of flow, there's this sense of movement, there is this sense of interplay, right, between where she is and where she's going. A sense of placement and location. And that's something fascinating. That's something worth exploring. And so we'll continue with the exploration. This Untitled, oil on linen, signed in Farsi, lower right, framed. It is 73 by 114 centimeters. That's 28 and 3/4 by 44 and 7/8 inches. Footnotes. I'm from Kasan, a painter by trade. Sometimes I build a cage with paint and sell it to you, so that with the song of the poppy imprisoned within the heart of your loneliness may be refreshed. The heart of your loneliness may be refreshed. That's from the sound Waters' Footsteps, first published in 1965, uh, translated by M.R. Dari in 2009. And I think that's an excellent way to start off our exploration of his work, with that verse, with those few lines, because it's saying, I'm a painter by trade, right? It's it's speaking to a vocation. It's speaking to a calling, right? When someone says that this is what I do, right? That this is my trade, this is my craft. One thing about tradesmen and craftsmen is that they take a sense of pride in their work. It's not like you just show up and you clock in and you sit at a cubicle all day where you are a nameless, faceless drone, right? No, no. When you are a tradesman, when you are a craftsperson, you are creating something. You are putting your name to it. You are infusing the artwork with your animation, your what is within you. You are giving it life. And so, when someone says that I am a painter by trade, he's saying that I imbue this painting with a life force. I give it life. I give it a sense of animation, anime mundi, right? I give it the soul of its world. And so he says, sometimes I build a cage with paint to sell to you, right? It's very interesting to build a cage with paint, right? To paint one's prison, right? Perhaps is he saying that he is creating or showing you the pain that you live in, the distant places that are within you. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps. We'll explore that. But so that the song of the poppy imprisoned within you, there is the key. The song that is within you, right? It is already imprisoned, right? It's somehow caged up, locked up. And this is a lot of times what we see in artistic works, is that the artists know that the creative force is within them, but somehow it is locked. It is locked within them, perhaps by feelings of doubt or insecurity or shame or pain. Whatever reason, it is a human quality that people leave the dreams to decay and die within them. Even though they're yearning to be free, even though the song is yearning to be sung, everybody does what is whatever in their power to say, no, no, I will silence this song. I will suppress this dream. I will avert this destiny. Not on my watch. Why is that a human quality? And why does Sohrab seem to point it out? That we allow our dreams to decay within us. That song that is imprisoned within us. And perhaps in this painting, perhaps this figure represents the song. Perhaps these trees represent a prison. Perhaps this song is yearning to be free. Or maybe not. Let's continue into his bio. An influential practitioner of new poetry, the earliest 20th century modernist literary movement that formally challenged classical Persian poetry. Here we go once again with this confluence. We always see these artists, they always seem to point out that they are in a society that is in a midst of flux, in a midst of change, to challenge the old ways, right? This is what artists do in the Western canon, in the Western context, is this coming to terms with modernity, coming to terms with a changing world, and saying that what we once saw as beautiful can now be oppressive. Perhaps what he's saying is that the old ways, the traditions, the customs, they have become suffocating. He is painting the cages, and perhaps the cage that he is painting is really the culture, right? The classical culture, the classic traditions that say this is who we are, but it doesn't give enough credence to who we can become, who and what one can be. Perhaps that's what Sohrab is getting at. Perhaps. Let's continue. Sohrab Sepehri is equally considered a key member of the second generation of Iranian modernist painters. Rather than participating in search for a national Iranian artistic identity, and as advocated by the Sakha Khan group of artists in the 1960s, for example, he espoused a global vision embedded in non-denominational mysticism and a deep spiritual relationship between humanity and nature as an antidote to unbridled materialism and armed conflict. We begin to see this theme throughout artists, even though they are not necessarily classically religious, right, and orthodox in a particular canon. We see them influenced by a sense of spirit, right, a sense of being in a relationship with the world around them. This is very interesting. This is very fascinating. This is what we begin to see. What we begin to see over and over and over again with artists is this deep spiritual life, is this deep hunger to reconcile the world within them with the materialism and the conflict and the chaos in the world around them. How does one make sense? And oftentimes we see artists turn to these mystical traditions. We oftentimes see them turn to the fringe areas of a spiritual life, to the mystical traditions, the ones that infuse the spiritual with the artistic, the ones that enable an artist to see their interior life. And this has to be something that should be said for all artists. If you are going to create a work, and if you are experiencing a block, what is the depth of your inner life? How are you exploring it? We've seen it with so many of the artists that we've seen on this tea ceremony. There was a deep reconciling of a spiritual life, of an inner life. And so it says, Sepehri was born in Kashan in 1928, a historic city renowned for its beautiful architecture and carpet design. He wrote and painted and from an early age, self-taught. He developed his art outside of the academy system. Once again, not formally trained, right? He found his voice. We've seen it in both circumstances where they found their voice inside of the academy system, but he found his voice outside of it, right? He was the quintessential outsider, right? He didn't join the groups. He didn't join the Sakan group, right? He didn't join the traditions. He said, no, I'm going to seek to discover myself outside of the traditions, outside of the cultures that are dominant of the day. And he says, that remaining stylistically on the periphery of the avant-garde, right? He was the outsider. And going forward, he was probably trying to see, why don't I fit in, right? When he was going through his life, when he was coming of age, when he was coming to terms with his artwork, he was probably saying, I should probably join this group. Why am I not joining this group? What is with me? Perhaps why are they rejecting my work? And why am I not feeling like I should really try to be a part of this group, be a part of this movement, be a part of the acceptable crowd? And really, just as Kierkegaard said, we can understand it going forward, but if he was to be influenced by the avant-garde, by the influences of his day, we would not have works like this. We would not have this deep call, this deep longing, as the Germans say. We wouldn't see this Tekken Ruha, the pull of the soul. It's almost as if you can see this figure. She's been pulled towards something. There's a migratory pattern within her. There is almost as if something is imprinted upon her soul that she should be moving forward, moving in a direction. This figure is in motion, headed somewhere. And so if perhaps Sohrab joined the groups, perhaps if he created acceptable art, perhaps if he stayed within the conventions of his day and he did not confront the sense of oppressive voice of the weight of tradition, we would not have this brilliance here, because this is a work of brilliance. This is a work of artistic genius. This is a work of profound clarity and insight. And perhaps when he was painting it, Sohrab himself did not even fully witness or realize what it was he was creating, but what he was saying, he was painting, was the hallmarks of liberation. What he was painting is the soul's yearning for freedom. What he was painting was this sense of self-discovery. What he was painting was this sense of mystery unfolding in life. And perhaps you cannot notice this going forward. As Kierkegaard said it. Life can only be understood moving backwards. But you have to live it moving forward. And so it's almost as if with each step she begins to understand this figure more and more, that she is on the right track, but taking the next step, there may be some uncertainty, there may be some fear, and that is a part of our lives. We have to move into the mystery. And maybe, perhaps that is what Sohrab is saying. That is the cage that is painting, that you must move into the mystery. You have to move out of the cage. You have to allow the song to be sung outside of you. Perhaps. Perhaps. Continuing. Even so, His formative paintings were clearly influenced by European expressionist painters. His signature work, quickly rendered semi-abstract meditative landscapes, are strongly indebted to Zen painting and brush technique that come later after life-changing journey to Japan in 1960. What we see and a lot of the works that we've seen here is this exploration of an artist with mysticism and with Zen, with this call to simplicity, with this call towards balance, with this call towards harmony. Zen is always this teaching of harmonious life, of things in balance. And an artist oftentimes seeks a sense of balance in their lives, even though they may live with great excess, even though they may live with great sense. There's this sense that one must reduce down to the simplicity of form, of shape, of color. Perhaps a photographic rendering of a subject does not quite convey the fullness of meaning. So perhaps you have to take out some of the detail and extract the deeper essence. Perhaps that's what takes place in an abstract painting. Maybe that's why we have to do it. Maybe that's why it has to be expressed this way in an imaginative, in a stylistic rendering that is not necessarily a picture perfect postcard or image of what's taking place, but rather it's trying to evoke a mood, right? A tone, a feeling, a felt sense, a somatic experience. And so we see that he was influenced by global trends, right? The expressionist painters, right? This sense of looking around the world. Do you ever see that artists looking around the world with this wonder and awe and seeing which wind blows into their lives and says, I've breathed fresh air through Zen. I've breathed fresh air through mysticism. I breathed fresh air through abstract expressionism. I breathed fresh air through my visits to Japan and seeing how those paintings were created. And it is in this fusion, in this mix of taking and experiencing and appreciating other cultures and fusing it through the lens of your own and creating something out of it, emerging something out of it, breathing something out of it that is quite wonderful and beautiful. So, second pour as we continue this round of this discussion of Sohrab's work. And perhaps while we are listening to Sohrab's work, perhaps we can hear this song of the tea leaves, because we know we like this song. This is the song that the tea leaves sing, if you listen closely. My friend, it's good to see you again. My friend, it's good to see you again. Continuing. What should we dedicate this second pour to? Second round pour to? Perhaps if the first round was for the dreams within you, perhaps now we should do to the relationships around you. May they be restored, be bountiful, and filled with abundance. Namaste. The present lot is a unique example of Sepehri's oeuvre, executed at the height of his career. It depicts the Oriental women in full-length white dress, standing on a wooded precipice and gazing intently west toward a blood-red setting sun. The composition is rendered on a diagonal and divided into two halves, leaving figure and landscape floating on a sea of monochrome unfilled space. The painting was realized with quick glyphic calligraphic strokes akin to Japanese sumie, ink and brush paintings closely associated with Zen Buddhism, customarily executed in one sitting at the state of high concentration. Sumie works on paper emphasize an aesthetic world with view expressed by the term wabi-sabi that is the visual representation of the Buddhist concept of transience imbued with a sense of serene melancholy, spiritual longing, familiar notions in Sepehri's creative products. Ah, spiritual longing. Isn't that kind of what we note here? Isn't that kind of what we see here? There is a longing. That's a good way of phrasing it. A sense of longing. Of where this figure is and where that figure is heading. There's some longing. There's some tenderness. Perhaps the figure knows that maybe she'll never get there. Maybe the figure is well acquainted with the difficulties in arriving at a specific place. Perhaps there's just this wistful sense, a hope that one day she could be there. It's very interesting. I wonder what she's thinking. I wonder what she's holding in her heart. Do you ever wonder that? What are you holding in your heart? This is the work of Sohrab Sepehri. What a strange taste for me. I only love three. You who were and came, you who are standing next to you, you who your heart and mind are looking for and who are not. Immense Zadonis. He speaks so beautifully. He speaks so well of the strange taste, right? This confusion, right? He speaks of this, of what they refer to as the spiritual longing. He speaks to this tenderness. I only love three. You who came, right? The figure who came. You who are standing next to you. And you who your heart and mind are looking for. The past, the present, the future. The three graces in life. Could it be that this is the same quality that Sohrab is trying to transmit? Perhaps she is looking at herself, looking at the person she is becoming, standing in the person who she is, and has turned her back towards who she was. Perhaps this is what this painting represents, the sense of the past, the present, the future. Who one was, who one is, and who one is yearning and longing to be. Perhaps that is the nature of spiritual longing. Perhaps. Continuing, diving into some more of the details of Sohrab's life. Notable poet and painter, the third of five children, so right there, the middle child. He was in the middle of the bunch. Sohrab was born, and maybe that's why he wasn't the firstborn, so he wasn't the one that was most entitled. He wasn't the youngest, so he didn't have the most attention. But perhaps because he was in that middle place, that's where he felt that he did not quite belong, that he was yearning for something, a yearning for his place within the world. That's perhaps why he was looking out and looking towards the world, getting influenced by the winds of the world, traveling the world to influence his work, to influence his art. About 3 months after Sohrab's birth, the family went to Glapagian and then to Kansar before settling in the Darwaza Attar quarter of Kasan. A painter, skilled calligrapher, tar maker, and player, multi-talented this guy was. Sepehri's father worked for the telegraph and post office there until he became paralyzed early in Sohrab's adolescence. I'm sure that had to play a seminal role in his work, a seminal role in asking and questioning why, right? You could almost imagine him saying, "Why, God, is this taking place? Why? Why, God?" And we see this happening in so many of the artists' life, these young formative years. Something traumatic happened, something just that shook them deeply to their core, something that reminded them and shown them the fragility of humanity and that helped them to awaken to the depth of their being, right? There's something early on that just shook them. And we can see it here, early in Sohrab's life, early in his adolescence, when his father became paralyzed, and how that must have impacted the family. Leaving Sohrab's mother to take the position in the same office to support the family. A published poet, Sepehri's maternal grandmother, Hamada Sepehri, was wife to Malik al-Morakin, the daughter of Mazira Muhammad Tariq Khan, a notable historian and author. So there was a connection to a cultural figure, a seminal cultural figure within the tradition. For the first part of his life, Sepehri lived in the family home, which had a large orchard. Right? Can you imagine the experiences that must have been like to go out into the orchard and to see the fruit taking place and to see the beauty of all the trees and the changing of the seasons and the watering and the blossoming, and how that must speak to his spirit, that must speak to this mysticism, that must speak to this spiritual life, to see the trees constantly going through this process of blooming and the leaves falling, of this blossoming and this birth and this death and this birth and this death, almost as Zen-like, this cycle of birth and death and birth and death. And we continue. It says, from 1933 to 1940, he attended the Kanyam School, later named Modares, where he started painting early and wrote his first poem, a traditional quatrain, at the age of 10. In the summer of 1940, Sepehri took his first job at Kasan Textile Factory and was then temporarily hired by the Ministry of Agriculture as a field worker to combat the plague of locusts that had afflicted Kasan that year. You imagine that, a plague of locusts, right? The very harvest, the heart, the fruit, the food of the people under attack, and he was there to save it. Can you imagine how that must have inspired his work? So then Sepehri moved to Tehran in 1943, and he found employment at the School of Education, where he met a poet, um, Masfik Kasani, pen name Abbas Ki Manes. Isn't that what it's like we see over and over again? It's interesting how we see these common themes, these common narratives happen where there's this early age trauma that's shaping individuals go out there, find a work, find a job, try to find a way to support themselves. And in their midst of supporting themselves, they move, they find a place. And then as they move and find their place, they also find community. They find a sense of belonging. They find a sense of place. They find a sense of location, of sense of being rooted, a sense of, and as they are rooted, they become expanded, right? They expand themselves and they become cross-pollinated with other thinkers and other individuals who vibe with them, right? They found their voice through the voices of others. We'll continue. We'll continue. Who familiarized him with Persian prosody. And there we go. There we go. It's it's almost like that hero's journey where they meet the figure, the keymaker, who helps to unlock what is within them, right? They know that the song is within them. They can't quite figure out how to get it out, right? Kassan, he knew he was finding his voice. Sepehri, he was finding his voice. He knew something was in him. He was moving. He was going. He was moving, but he couldn't quite figure it out. And sometimes we meet a community when we find that sense of belonging and we get introduced to an idea. That idea becomes the key, which awakens this sense of freedom within us. The spiritual longing turns into a spiritual freedom because the idea has unlocked the heart. It's unlocked the mind. The idea, the words, the community, the belonging, the identity. It is found. And so this is the artistic narrative, this movement of identity, this discovering of self and this discovering of calling and craft, but also within the context of this relationship, of this belonging, of this community. And so every artist must find an identity. Every artist must find a sense of belonging. The artistic narrative. During this period, he studied the poetry, and he published his first book of poetry. In the summer of 1947, he published his first book of poetry. So let me see, 1 second, let me look up something. So there he was, so 47, so he was 20 years old, let me see, 20 years old. He was born in October 1928. So it was 19 when he published his first book of poetry. 19. There you go. Sometimes you just know. You just know. You have to sing the song. You just have to sing the song that is within you. No matter the age. You just got to sing it. You got to discover it. In the summer of 1948, Sepehri met a poet and painter, Mansour Sebani, who introduced him to the works of Vincent van Gogh and Nima Yushi, the first modern poet to successfully break free of the Persian classical prosody and the traditional imagery and conventions. And there he went. He went to, and he found the people that helped to provide a way out, to say, no, you don't have to identify within these conventions, right? These classical conventions. No, there is a path forward. There is a path out of this. You don't have to try to fit yourself when you don't feel that you fit in this. There is a way out. There is a way forward. And for those of you artists out there, there is a way forward for you as well. Continuing on. My friend, it's good to see you again. My friend, my friend, it's good to see you again. And when the night is through, you shall go this way and I shall go that way until we meet again. My friend, my friend, it's good to see you again. So, are you enjoying exploring the work of Sepehri? Sohrab Sepehri. Take a look at this color, clarity, cloud, exquisite. This is some good tea, some good oolong. All I need now is a charcuterie plate to complete it. Moving on. And so his poetry is what he's really noted for, but his artwork is what we are exploring. And so it says in 1964, he completely resigned from his government position and began focusing all his time and energy on poetry and painting. So let's see, 28, 38, 48, 58, 68. So in his mid 30s, he left his positions and he said, I'm going to focus all my time, all my energy on my poetry and my painting. We see this as one enters into midlife, they say, now I'm going to dedicate myself. I now have found my voice. I now see that I must move towards, right? Just as this figure, I see where I am becoming. I see where I am going. I've found community. I found belonging. I found the voice. I found the tool. I found the inspiration. And now I'm prepared to move forward. And perhaps this figure is just standing there, just waiting for the right time to move forward. And so it says, he lived in the U.S. for 1 year and subsequently spent about 2 years living in Paris. To go live in the U.S., to go live in New York, and then to go live in Paris. How wonderful that must have been. During the time period, he painted numerous paintings applying the same soft and gentle style which can be found in his poems. In 1979, he was diagnosed with cancer, and for the last time, he moved to England for treatment. A year later, in 1980, he passed away in Tehran and now rests at his birthplace, Kasan. Life's pleasant tradition, life's wings, is as vast as death. Life's a jump the size of love. Life's not something we put on the mantle of habit and forget. It does not matter where I am, the sky is always mine. Windows, ideas, air, love, earth, all mine. Why does it matter if sometimes the mushrooms of nostalgia grow? Let's take off our clothes. Water is just a foot away. Let's have a basket and fill it up with all the greens and all the reds. We are not to comprehend the secret of roses, but maybe swimming in the incarnation of roses, or maybe looking for the song of truth between the morning glory and the century. We are not to comprehend. Isn't that a lot like where we started with Kierkegaard? Life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. How can we comprehend moving forward? Sohrab says we are not to comprehend the secrets of the roses. But when you smell the roses, when you swim in the roses, when you are looking for the song of truth, perhaps then you smell the scent. Perhaps then you witness the morning glory. And sometime in the century, sometime in the movement, sometime in the time, you find, looking back, what you were not meant to comprehend. Thoreau writes, I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was no life, living so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and to suck the marrow of life. Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau lived deep. Kierkegaard lived deep. Sohrab lived deep. And perhaps as well, perhaps you will live deep as well. Perhaps you will suck the marrow out of life as well. Perhaps you as well will smell the fragrances and swim in the roses. Perhaps as well, somewhere on the journey, you will look back and see, what you could not comprehend would all make sense. We must live going forward. We must live moving forward. But we can't understand going forward. For that, we must look back. For that, we must reflect. For that, we must engage in introspection. For that, we must engage in some sort of meditative force which helps to process what we've been through. That's what we're discovering here. That this spiritual longing that's taking place is our way of making sense of what has happened. That longing about what is to come, of who we will become, perhaps that is what is being spoken here. As Zildjian says, there are three loves. You where you came, you where you are standing next to, and you where your heart and mind long to be. Where are you? Are you stuck in the past? Are you fully present? Are you moving towards where your heart and your mind long to be? Continuing on. This is another work by Sepehri, Untitled, rendered in 1970 to 1971. It says, as we know that Sepehri was a poet and painter, studying fine arts at Tehran University, later training with Japanese painters, becoming evident in pieces such as this small watercolor, his subdued palette, and a direct brushwork reflect the Zen philosophy that so influenced him in both verse and painting. The simple form suggests a landscape, perhaps that of his native town, Kashan. Beyond this, his work shows a great respect and humility before nature. Striking. quite lovely. It's quite beautiful. Continuing. Glorious is the world that sustains man like a maggot in a carcass. Mighty is the sea, desalted by the caprice in the eyes of the fish, hollowed in the star, engulfed in the firmament of pearl in the stomach of the mussel sky. Majestic soars the eagle, golden winged, above the lowlife. Black is the whole of the poet, a mole burrowing from no entrance to no exit. Missobini, Oswald, Machili. A mole burrowing from no entrance to no exit. No beginning, no end. As the Vedic says, the text, we fold on ourselves to rediscover ourselves. The heart folds upon itself. The breath folds upon itself, only to realize itself again, to find itself again. And perhaps somehow that is like our lives and our destiny. We come into this world hiding our dreams, hiding our hopes, only to know the pleasure of rediscovering them once more at some point and at some place within our lives. And perhaps it's that quality that Sepehri is communicating to us through his work. And I always say that each artist, they are helping to convey a deeper quality about the human condition. They are helping us to see that spiritual longing. And if we just stop long enough, if we just pause from the busyness of our day, pause from all the things that we have to do to just focus, to stabilize our attention, we begin to see this process of discovery taking place again. All the dreams that we've hidden, we begin to find them again and to know that pleasure of seeing one's own heart, of knowing one's own heart, of bearing witness to one's own being, to have that homecoming. And so this is an untitled work by Sohrab as well. Oil on Canvas, 1960. And so which work appeals to you most? One, two, or three? One, two, or three? Which would you see within your home? One, two, or three? It is now time for you to render the judgment of Paris. Now that you've had a chance to get acquainted and familiarize yourself with the oeuvre of Sohrab Sepehri's work, You begin to understand his influences and understand his life and his history and the tragedies that have befallen him and the community that had embraced him and the destiny that had unfolded within him. Perhaps now you are in a place where you can render judgment upon the work. What say you? How do you receive Sepehri's work? It's quite lovely. It's quite beautiful. It's deeply moving, meditative, and evocative. And as the footnote said, it has this quality of spiritual longing. It does what great artworks do. It says what cannot be said. It conveys what has not been heard. It sees what cannot be seen. Sohrab Sepehri. Nice work. Well done. Well done. Well done. Final toast. Final toast we provide to Sohrab Sepehri and his work. May the qualities that he wanted to convey be transmitted to future generations. And may we all discover the beauty of the life within us and tell it in our song, in our way, on our journey. Perhaps somewhere on that journey we look back and we see how far we've come. And it all makes sense. Namaste. Well, Cognoscenti, it's been a wonderful art tea ceremony. It's been wonderful to be able to come together and to share in this beautiful artwork, to discuss this wonderful artist. I hope you find a chance to explore some more of his work. It's absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning work. And just take a moment to salute this beautiful artist. The caliber of work, extraordinary, deeply moving. Until next time, deep gratitude to you all. Namaste.